And I'm very happy because I will be joined by international author Geoffrey Cann, who is go-to voice for digital innovations in the energy industry. With over 40 years of experience, he brings great expertise and insight about energy industry. Have you came across any of the biases about yourself, or maybe some of the stereotypes that you might have faced?
There's plenty. So the first one was, if you're not an engineer, you can't work in the industry very far. So that was a bias. That's just flat out not true. The chief executive officer for Imperial Oil eventually was Tim Hearn, and he was the head of the IT department for a long time. This is sort of probably true for anybody looking in a large organization, is that you really have to think about yourself when it comes to your own career in a big organization. You can't really count on others to look out for you. You've got to do your own advocacy.
But also another very interesting thing you said, that you need to be more assertive about your aspiration to become a leader in that company.
Yes.
Yeah. And I have seen myself, sometimes we have that mindset like, okay, I'm doing really great in my job, the work I have given, and people will notice around me.
Well, I went to Australia to learn the liquefied natural gas industry because the real job I wanted was to be working on an LNG project in Canada. And so that was a major, shift your family around the world to take a job, not because you want to move to Australia, but because you really want a different job back in. That's how you need to think about these things. And I think too many of us get caught in just thinking about the world very small, and we don't play the big game. What
would be your one key takeaway?
Well, at this point in time, one of the issues with the industry that we're in is these new artificial intelligence tools are starting to eat away at the low-end jobs in the industry. So my advice to people in the industry is concentrate on the people aspect of what you're doing, and because these tools will progressively chew away at all of the technical stuff. I'm very optimistic about the future for the oil and gas industry. The demand is still strong, and the demand for change in the industry is very strong. So I'm still optimistic. Like the obituary for oil and gas is premature. It's not going anywhere just yet.
It's not going anywhere.
And my third book is called Carbon Capital in the Cloud, and it was published just 2 years ago. And it sets out the case studies of best practice to accelerate the adoption of digital coming out of the pandemic. I mean, interesting statistic.
This is the Oil and Gas Breaking Bias show, where we are going to invite industry leaders to talk about their journeys and also technologies of tomorrow, in an effort to break some of the biases that might have formed around this energy industry. Hello everyone, I hope you are happy and healthy. I'm Anand Jha, and you are listening to the Oil and Gas Breaking Bias show. This is the series about leaders who have made it big in this energy industry while breaking some of the biases around them. And I'm very happy because I will be joined by international author Geoffrey Cann, who is go-to voice for digital innovations in the energy industry. As a brand ambassador for many technology companies, he doesn't just talk about innovation, but champions it while creating very innovative solutions for global audience. With over 40 years of experience, he brings great expertise and insight about energy industry. So let's deep dive into his journey and talk about what is next in this digital energy solution. So welcome, Geoffrey. I'm very happy to have you today.
Anna, it's a great pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. And we were discussing about, we have connected a long time ago, and very happy to connect with you again to talk about this industry and also learn from your journey, which is across 4 decades. So it will be very hard to bring everything into 20 to 25 minutes today, but I'm looking forward for our conversation. So without any further delay, as we discussed before, can you walk us through your personal and professional highlights that help you to shape or to reach wherever you are today?
Well, my career first started with Imperial Oil, a big Canadian oil company, which was a subsidiary of ExxonMobil. And it provided a great, almost like a master's in business administration, an MBA degree on how big oil companies run themselves. Exxon is very process-oriented. It's by the book. And so it was a great learning experience. But they also told me after I was there for a couple of years that because I wasn't an engineer, I would not be given the authority to look after any of the energized assets, gas plants, refineries, and the like. And so your career path inside big oil is rather limited. You're going to only be able to succeed on the commercial side. So I left and went and did a real MBA, and then I joined a consulting firm called Deloitte, and I stayed there for 30 years.
Big switch.
Yeah, big switch to consulting. Yeah, my interest in consulting was quite by accident. At the time, this was, if you come back in history, 1982, 1983, there was a major recession in North America. So jobs were scarce. And at the time, the consulting industry was recruiting. So I applied and took the role. I left working in the energy industry for a very, very long time, almost 10 full years. And I found myself living in Hong Kong, but working mostly in mainland China. And I remember taking photographs in one of the cities I was in at the time, showing donkey carts delivering coal door to door. And there were no cars, there's no trucks, there's just bicycles everywhere and people on foot.
Who could believe that? Like now, if you go to China, who could believe that?
I have the photographs. I have the receipts. I can show you. This is what it was like within my lifetime, right? It's not that long ago, just 20 years. Yeah. And so I came home to my wife and said, the world's largest country by population, China, gets its transportation system is on bicycle and on foot, and its energy system is coal delivered by donkeys. So there's going to be a huge demand for energy in China, and in North America, that's just a switch on the wall for us. We don't even think about it, but this whole country was going to expand. So I came back and got myself into the energy industry, and I've stayed there ever since. My work is covered the full length and breadth because as a consultant, you work wherever the industry has an interest in a problem to solve. So I've worked all up and down the industry. My most recent change, I did that within Deloitte, became a partner, worked in the industry for a solid 20 years, leading and running projects, and then left Deloitte 5 years ago to go do other things, which includes writing books and podcasting and speaking and the like. So that's, if you like, that's my career in a brief nutshell.
That's great mix of everything, like starting with the end user and then going around the world, looking how the world looks like, where is the energy demand is, and then coming back to this consulting topic.
Yes.
During this journey, like, have you came across any of the biases about yourself, or maybe some of the stereotypes that you might have faced?
Oh, there's plenty. So the first one was, if you're not an engineer, you can't work in the industry very far. So that was a bias. That's just flat out not true. Yes. The chief executive officer for Imperial Oil eventually was Tim Hearn, and he was the head of the IT department for a long time. Now, he may have been an engineer, but he also spent, I only knew him as a technology leader. Suncor's recent CEO, Mark Little, was also a technology professional from university, not an engineer. So there's a bias there that the industry tends to favor the engineering profession for leadership. And it certainly impacted my career. I wouldn't say it's hard to look back and, what could have happened. It doesn't work that way. But I know what.
Yeah. Either you can just go in that loop of what if scenarios,
Yeah, there's no point. But the industry the industry does have a lot of biases, and it's very much as an industry, it's the industry, and it's really driven by capital markets to a degree. Capital markets value the fact that oil prices go way, way up, and they also crash, because that volatility means that sometimes you're going to make a lot of money. And so the bias in the industry is towards the risky parts where there is the potential for huge wins. And so, the money tends to flow into the upstream for that reason. That's a bias that you have to deal with.
Makes sense, and I think that takes to our next question. What the changes you might have seen today, because as you said, you have started almost 30-40 years ago in this industry. But what changes do you see today? Is that biases still exist, or we are moving into different direction?
Well, right now, it depends on which country and which continent you're in, and what your political leadership is, which frames a bit about how the industry tends to react. But right now, the biggest single change facing the industry as a whole is this drive to decarbonize. And I'll go back to China. In 2023, China informed the energy observers around the world that its demand for gasoline had reached a peak, and it's now starting to decline. And this is driven by their adoption of electric cars and solar panels and the like. Well, this has global ramifications. So the Chinese bias now is to shift their energy infrastructure towards renewables as fast as possible. And whereas the North America bias, especially under the Trump administration, the incoming administration, will be to maintain the status quo, which is fossil fuel powered transportation and the like. So there's some political biases here that frame this. If you go to Europe, the recent floods in Spain have been extremely alarming. Europeans see the challenges of climate change very clearly because of the impacts it's having on the continent. So their emphasis is also to decarbonize. So there's these big changes are driving investments and how people think about the world now at quite a significant degree.
Makes sense. And I have seen those changes. The energy transition is a big topic. Especially it's getting more and more traction these days.
Yeah.
And it's more prominent in Europe, but slowly starts to make some progress in Asia and also like some other part of the world. I was visiting some of the countries in Latin America, like Brazil and Colombia, and met some customers there. They also talk about this energy transition, and also they're very serious about it.
No, very serious. I was looking at some statistics, but a heat pump in Asia is sold every 5 seconds.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, it's the demand. We don't really see the intensity of the change in North America because our infrastructure is much more mature. But if you're in Vietnam, Thailand, in Indonesia, Philippines, the demand for these new energy infrastructure, if you don't have to go through fossil fuels like natural gas, the demand for this new energy infrastructure is very high.
Yes, I can imagine, and people making commitment, and also they're making progress towards it.
Oh yeah.
So, but also on the other side of the coin, like we always also need a balance. Like how fast we want to move in that direction.
Yeah.
We have seen some examples where countries tried to change overnight, and that didn't work. What's your view on it?
Well, my view, and this is the central thesis for my books, is that the pathway to transition these Western economies, which are very dependent on fossil fuels, quickly is sheer folly. We simply do not have the manufacturing capacity to make all of the electric battery and electric motors that we need to replace all of the gasoline and diesel-powered motors. So we just don't have that ability. So it's going to take us time. So my view is that if for us to provide for both improvements to the climate and energy transition, one of the keys is to help the industry become as efficient as it possibly can. Yes. And that means to embrace new ways of doing work. And it's clear industry after industry ahead of oil and gas that has gone through major transformative effects has done so on the strength of digital innovations. And many of these innovations now have real promise within oil and gas. And so that's my hypothesis and my approach, and that's what underpins my books, which is if we want to preserve our way of life in the West while we do transition, then our pathway is to embrace digital innovation as quickly as possible in this industry.
And I think you made a really good point. So technologies are available today. In the past, the loss of discussion, but I think those are proven technologies today. Either it's a digital or electrification. There are like many technologies available which can help with energy efficiency and also give you the path with the sustainable transition, I will say. Like it's not a switch that you can flip overnight.
No.
That's not going to happen.
No, can't be done. If we want to sell electric cars in North America that are manufactured in North America by North Americans under brands like GM and Ford, we have to completely retool the entire supply chain to build engines and cars. That's not something you do overnight.
No, definitely. No. That's what we have to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Just adding to this question, like if somebody wants to enter this industry today, what opportunities they should look into it?
Well, that's a really interesting question. It's very cloudy and very challenging to be super precise on what is the right pathway here. But my view today is that given the fossil fuel demand curve has flattened now in China, is starting to bend down. The demand for petroleum products for cars is about to start to see a material and prolonged decline.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So what does that mean? Well, it means the competition to provide refined petroleum products is going to intensify. Refineries are going to have to shut down. We've already seen several just in the last 2 months. 2 in California and Los Angeles area, 1 in the United Kingdom, just simply said we can no longer compete. This trend should continue. So if someone wants to work in the industry, you'd have to really look far out and ask, where is the value in this industry going to be? And I can tell you, it doesn't appear like it's going to be in the refining sector because that's starting to shrink.
It's called shrink. Yes, no, I agree. I agree. Like I also talk to many end users, and I think it's very consistent to what you just said. They are not investing into downstream, but upstream and midstream, there are still investments are happening.
Just in the decarbonization of the upstream alone, like leak detection and repair, methane tracking, carbon tracking and monitoring, track and trace of carbon and plastics recycling. There's so many fields where you could enter into this industry and have a fantastic long-term career. Anything to do with carbon would be very top of mind for me. We barely understand where our carbon emissions come from. We can't track them correctly. We don't price them right. Go into carbon. It's a career.
And there are like many things are happening. The frameworks, still there is no global framework where you can account that carbon tracking or GHG emissions. So there is no consistent global framework exist. But we are moving in that direction. I think sooner or later we will have something that we can all rely on.
Yeah, it's coming quickly, and we have to have it, because if we don't, we can't allocate capital correctly to deal with the transition properly, because we don't know where the emissions are the greatest, and so we misallocate our capital. Yeah,
and also it's all about the complete value chain. That's also we have to keep in mind. It's not about just production, which is producing carbon, but also you have to see complete value chain from upstream to downstream, and also maybe the users of that product. And so that's very important to track.
Full chain,
complete food chain, complete value chain. No, that's great. Just coming back to your journey, just to explore a little bit more. You already talked about one of the biases that you have to face when you started your career. But if you have given a chance, how do you relive your journey?
How would I relive it?
Yes.
So I'm not a particularly. I don't look in the rear view mirror that often. I'm generally a look out the windscreen kind of guy.
Hypothetically, if you're given a chance.
Well, given the chance, it's way too late now, but given the chance, I probably should have done an engineering degree. And because I think the opportunities that sort of appeal to me in hindsight would have been perhaps a little better, a little different. So that would be one, if there was one thing I would have done differently. Another thing I would have done differently and this goes back to my time at Deloitte, is I would have been more assertive in going after leadership roles.
Understood.
I was a bit too. I at the time, this is sort of probably true for anybody looking in a large organization, is that you really have to think about yourself when it comes to your own career in a big organization. You can't really count on others to look out for you. You've got to do your own advocacy. So I would, if I could do things differently, that would be one.
No, that's great. You talk about engineering. You already mentioned why you want to make that change. But also another very interesting thing you said, that you need to be more assertive about your aspiration to become a leader in that company.
Yes. Yeah.
And I have seen myself. Sometimes we have that mindset like, okay, I'm doing really great in my job, the work I have given, and people will notice around me.
Correct. Yeah.
And sometimes it works, but sometimes you have to show the value you are bringing.
Exactly.
You have to work on your path. So I have seen both ways works, but I fully agree what you just said, Geoffrey. We need to be assertive, and also we need to put a plan to reach where we want to reach in couple of years or months, whatever it's your plan, I think.
Yeah. An example someone shared with me, this is a story from long ago, but his advice to me at the time, it was always stood by very well, is to take the job you're doing today, not because it's the job, the ultimate job, but because it prepares you for the real job that you want.
Yes.
And too many people, I think, don't cast their mind forward to say, well, that's the real job that I want over there. And so what am I doing today that's positioning me correctly for that job? And so that was great advice. So I've always taken that on board for 20 years now, which is always to look one or two steps out to say, well, where should I be, and what should I be doing today to position myself for the job that I really want?
I fully agree. And I have done myself this thing, like when I started my career as a commissioning engineer, then moved into business development, then took a local role in Canada, and then took a global role. But whenever the role I had, like always start planning or maybe put an aspiration about my next role. And that helped me to do two things: getting better prepared for my next job, and also motivated me to do my current job better than everybody else around me. So it helps both. It helps the company, it helps also yourself to be better prepared.
Yeah, I agree. It's served me very, very well. As an example, I went to Australia to learn the liquefied natural gas industry because the real job I wanted was to be working on an LNG project in Canada. And so I was a major, shift your family around the world to take a job not because you want to move to Australia, but because you really want a different job back in. That's how you need to think about these things. And I think too many of us get caught in just thinking about the world very small, and we don't play the big game.
You made a really good point. But those kind of decisions you just mentioned about moving to Australia to learn about something, that also comes with a risk, correct?
Oh, yeah. In my case, is a very big risk. It turns out that Canada could not mobilize its liquefied natural gas investments. And so I came back to Canada to know LNG projects. I did my part. I moved to Australia.
You did your part. I think at that time you have visibility. It's coming. So you were getting prepared. But some things are not in your hand.
Yeah, it's not in my control. I can't control whether there's going to be, but I was well positioned. But what I did learn while I was in Australia, again, was thinking ahead. This wave of digital innovation had come to Australia at the same time as it was coming to other parts of the world. And so I decided at the time that I would also embrace some of this digitalization activity and learn about it, so that when I did come back to Canada, I was able to quickly pivot away from liquefied natural gas and instead focus on digital adoption, because I saw that also as another major wave of change coming at the industry.
That makes sense. I think that's a really good point, and we can all learn from it. Just switching a topic a little bit here, and I think we already started talking about that topic. If somebody needs to be prepared, so we talked about like where the opportunity exists,
Yes.
But if somebody needs to prepare to cash on those opportunities, what will be your one key takeaway?
Well, at this point in time, one of the issues with the industry that we're in is these new artificial intelligence tools are starting to eat away at the low-end jobs in the industry. A good example, let's say you have a pump gauge at a facility, and the current process is you send an operator every couple of days to go look at that gauge and write down what the gauge says for pump pressure and so for lubrication.
And that's going for forever. Like forever, they are doing the same process. They drive to different field areas. They go to well and note down that information.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, artificial intelligence now allows us to point a camera at that gauge and look at the gauge take a video or photo of it, take that image, load it to the cloud, and then interpret the gauge, which means the operator no longer has to go around and visit that pump. That's an example of artificial intelligence eating away at the bottom end of the job hierarchy, the job ladder inside oil and gas. So if you kind of cast your mind forward, you can see how that just starts, eating away at all of our jobs. So what's the challenge for people is to say, well, what are the skill sets that are distinctively human that these artificial intelligence tools are never going to be able to replicate? Yes. Those are the skills and capabilities I want to have. Teamwork, communications, empathy, problem solving, risk taking, all kinds of complicated decision making. These are the sorts of areas where humans are going to have to play in the future. Yes. So my advice to people in the industry is concentrate on the people aspect of what you're doing, and because these tools will progressively chew away at all of the technical stuff.
And we have already started looking into these changes. That's happening across all the industry, not just oil and gas. So reskilling is necessary.
Absolutely. And I think reskilling is, in oil and gas, we probably had a mindset, and again, one of our biases, I'll learn how to do this area, and become really good at it. Yes. And then, but the problem is the world is changing so much everywhere that holding so tightly to that one dimension is suddenly now a problem. Yes. And so we're going to have to move away from being a dedicated learner on a very narrow topic to be a learner on a much broader topic. And I think that's the promise that what people have to do in the future.
I fully agree. And also when you talk about oil and gas, if you see in the past, people used to say, if price drops, they say, don't worry, like price will come back. So it means we don't have to do anything. Just wait.
Well, that's one of the. It is a to a degree. It's certainly in the upstream. It's a self-destructive business model or a self-eroding business model. Every barrel of oil you take out of the ground is one less barrel you have to take out of the ground tomorrow, and so the value of the business is perpetually declining.
Yes.
And as long as demand is perpetually growing, that's going to create eventually a gap that prices will have to go up to compensate for the fact that there's now a shortage of supply for the demand that we have. But if you bend the curve, the demand curve, so it flattens and starts to go down, suddenly that math doesn't work anymore.
And definitely. And then you have to reinvent yourself, and we just talked about.
Yeah.
And that's a necessity of your business. If you keep doing what you're doing, and then you have to rethink.
Exactly.
The world is changing really at fast pace.
The International Energy Agency just last week said that they're forecasting there will be a 1 million barrel per day surplus of oil starting in 2025.
Oh, it's coming soon.
Relative to demand. It's coming very quickly. 1 million barrels a day. Now, the last time we had 1 million barrels a day of oversupply, it was 1 to 2 million barrels per day. It was in 2014. And by 2015, the price of oil had collapsed down to $30 a barrel.
I remember those days. I was in Calgary at that time.
It's the writing is on the wall. If we can't have and this explains in part too why many of the economies are very, very anxious about China's growth prospects and the Trump administration's threat of sanctions on China's economy. If that flattens down China's growth at all, then that we accelerate this expansion of supply and reduction in demand. It might get very ugly.
Yeah, let's see how it changes, because this industry goes through different swings all the time.
Swings and roundabouts.
Yeah,
exactly.
So let's see how it goes. The last, not the least, the question, as we were discussing before, we already touched many of the biases, but one key bias that still exists in this industry.
Well, there is. There's so many, but a key bias in the industry is that when the price of energy or oil goes down, then the industry tends to clamp down and trim all of its expenditures. It does so unevenly. It does, but this is a problem, because when the industry starts to expand, it hasn't laid the foundation for any improvements to the business to kick in, so that it is on a better, surer footing during the next upswing. So this is one of the biases which I think is really troubling. If the price of oil does go down, and there is capacity in the organization to make change, that's the time to drive change hard.
Yes.
The organizations are going to be ready for it. And then when the upswing kicks back in, now you're on a completely new foundation. Our industry doesn't do that.
It doesn't do that. Yes.
Doesn't do that. Once the downturn happens, we tend to start cutting everything, and then all of the projects which drive the value in the future tend to get cut too. And I think that's a bias I'd like to see changed.
And that's exactly what we have seen in 2015 when the price dropped.
Yes.
Then another one in 2020, like when it went to negative, and you could see the effect of that price drop.
Yeah,
so many jobs were cut and all those things.
Yep.
And then demand came back. We could not find people to fill those jobs.
Exactly. Yeah. It's because they left the industry.
They left the industry. They went somewhere else. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the certainly next generation of young people are watching very carefully what's going on in the industry. And the narrative in the school systems, of course, is don't go into oil and gas.
Definitely.
That's being replaced by renewable energy products. There's no demand there, you know.
And the people like you and me who are serving this industry for so many decades, this industry will survive. And I will say it will transition itself over time. So if you're listening to this one, this industry is there. Yes, it's slow to adapt these changes. Yes. But it's a progressive industry, and it will make changes. So if you're listening, I think there are a lot to explore in this oil and gas industry in coming future. Now with that, actually, we are running out of time. But I didn't realize it's almost 30 minutes now. We are talking about so many things, but we have to stop now. So thank you so much, Geoffrey, for all your insights and expertise. But before we sign off, anything to add here?
Well, I'm very optimistic about the future for the oil and gas industry. The demand is still strong, and the demand for change in the industry is very strong. So I'm still optimistic. Like the obituary for oil and gas is premature. It's not going anywhere just yet.
It's not going anywhere. No, I fully agree. Another question I have before we sign off, I read your book, Bits, Bytes, and Barrels, the
Yes.
digital transformation of oil and gas, almost 5-6 years ago. What is
Yes.
next?
Well, I wrote a second book in the pandemic, or contributed to a second book on artificial intelligence in the upstream industry. That's more of a university textbook, and it was done in collaboration with some Samsung engineers in the factories in South Korea. And my third book is called Carbon Capital in the Cloud, and it was published just 2 years ago.
Okay.
And it sets out the case studies of best practice to accelerate the adoption of digital coming out of the pandemic. I mean, interesting statistic, 60% of oil companies only started using cloud computing during the pandemic.
I think they were forced.
They were forced, yeah.
They
They
were forced
didn't
to,
have a
yes.
choice. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So that book is really about, how do you do this fast? And I don't have plans at the moment for a third book, but you never know. Stay tuned.
No, definitely. So I'm going to read that book. I'm going to order today.
Thank you.
And then we can connect again to talk about that book like the way we did last time.
I'm in.
So thank you so much, Jeff. So with that, I will sign off for this week. Keep listening, Oil and Gas Breaking By Show. We will connect again next week. Thank you. Have a great day.